despite good credit growth and financial results, Bank Nifty and some of the banks have underperformed significantly last 6 months to 1 year. In fact, since 2020. So, what could be the possible reasons?
See, Bank Nifty, I don't know. Bank Nifty is a combination of private sector banks, PSUs, a whole host of things, right? In the last 1.5 years, you've had a reasonable, in fact, great rate of return from PSUs, which have done really well. Whereas your private sector banks, barring ICICI Bank, have struggled, right? So it's important to understand and realize banking is a cyclical business. Banking in India has always been sold as a structural business. It has never been a structural business because banking has its fortunes tied to the credit growth and the NPA cycle, right? So when you have a good, reasonable credit growth with a low NPA cycle, along with valuations in your favor, banks will do well, right? So what is the reason for an underperformance? Because today the market is rather playing companies which are beneficiaries of the direct capex rather than to play second order effects of credit growth from institutions which would lend to these companies for the capex, right? So I think you really want from here first capex to get deployed significantly, and then if the credit growth happens on the back of that and the net interest margins stay robust, banks would do reasonably okay. But having said that, you also need to pay attention to the valuations that you buy any of these banks at. So just because credit growth is happening, if you buy it at the wrong valuation, doesn't mean that you have to make money.
So, Naveen, when you say that you only look at cash component, which is the highest, cash generating machines, I would say. So, what if do you buy? So, out of these 20 companies, is this the one parameter which is very, very common, and without that, you will not move and buy any company?
So
Suppose
if
my
a
cash will be coming tomorrow, then
if a company cannot generate cash flows, then there is a fundamental flaw in the company, right? So, you cannot tell me that I continuously grow revenues, I continuously grow PAT, but I cannot show cash flows. What that means is such a company has to keep financing that working capital through debt. So that's what that means, right? So which means you are then buying debt heavy businesses. You could be buying great revenue growth, but you are buying debt heavy balance sheets. Would we want to be doing that? No. So for us, the reason cash flows matter is because that automatically lends itself into a stronger balance sheet. And you asked me a question: how did we withstand the downturn of COVID? Because each of our companies had very strong balance sheets through that. Such companies do better during bear markets.
so out of these 20 companies that you're saying, I mean, whatever 15, 18, 20, the way you construct the portfolio, you will eventually. So, do you find those companies in mid and small cap as well, and how would be the component, if I may ask you, generally the trend is?
So today, we still have a sizable exposure in mid and small caps, right? So our average market cap of our portfolio is around 47,000 crores today, right? Which means it's all at an average level. It is a midish cap portfolio. Our exposure between mid and small cap would be slightly close to, I would say, 64 to 65%, and around 25% in large caps across the board. So we still have a reasonably good exposure in mid and small caps. The example that we spoke about, CAMS, happens to be a small cap, but it's still a cash flow generating business, right? So when you are buying characteristics of a business which have pricing power, which where you don't have too much of competition, it lends itself into growth, which translates into cash flows. That's the nature of the kind of businesses you want to be buying.